This is an amazing introduction, and I feel very grateful for you doing this, but also slightly bad that clearly how much I've written and you had to read it out. So many thanks, many thanks. I will shorten it next time. I'm learning as we're speaking. But thank you for making me sound so incredible. I am absolutely delighted to be here with each and every one of you. I just keep looking at the number of the participants, looking who's joining, who's popping out and popping in. And as much as we're all online and in different places in the country, I am sure I can still feel the energy, and it's absolutely lovely. Yes, and yes, I'm honored to be with you in the next hour and to be working with our panel and with each and every one of you. Please use this opportunity. We have great expertise in the room. So do it. Ask hard questions. Avoid questions that you think are most important. Please do it. So just a couple of things about the next hour. What we will do is in about a minute, I will ask our wonderful panel to introduce themselves, and we will have about 10 minutes then in breakout groups. We will have two broad topic areas for you to consider, just to help you frame those questions. Of course, if you have something that you feel super important and it doesn't quite fit under those topics, I'm sure it's going to be okay to ask those. In fact, let's see what happens if that happens. Yes, and we will then have a short break, but we will keep the slider open. So if something else comes to you in that break, please add it or continue working on it if you wish to. We will then come back and I will be asking each panel member to respond to the questions that we've picked. We know that we don't have much time. We will have about half an hour to engage with our panel. So just bear that in mind, but your comments will not be lost. Everything that's in the chat will then be looked at, and we will make sure that one way or another, it will feed into how we do Aurora, okay? So I'm just gonna name our panel to impress you, to start the feeling of a great impression, I suppose. So we have Anne Tilbury, and I see her on my screen, so that's quite handy. So Anne is organizational development specialist from Glasgow Caledonian University. We also have Dr. Mary Richards, who is the division lead for transdisciplinary studies for global change from Brunel. And we also have Katie Murray. And Katie is an inclusion and equity facilitator and speaker. She's also an author and a coach. And perhaps if Katie could introduce herself and then Anne and Mary would follow suit, that would be amazing. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. It's absolutely lovely to be here with you today. Thanks for the introduction, Maria, and all of the speakers so far. It's great to be here. Here's my book, Changemakers, A Woman's Guide to Stepping Up Without Burning Out at Work. It feels like it's relevant for our topics today so far, so I thought I'd share that with you. And for me, this theme of intersectionality that we're already talking about and this theme of resilience and well-being that we're already talking about are really key lenses that I bring to the conversation. And I'm also a big advocate for more joy at work. So I'm already feeling the joy today. Thank you for that.
Hello, I'm Mary Richards, and it's a massive pleasure to be here. I can hardly believe it's been 10 years since I went to the first Aurora event in London, and I just wanted to share one recollection from that moment, which back then was when a Vice Chancellor or former Vice Chancellor of Oxford Brookes says, there's a special place in hell for women who don't help other women, and that's kind of stayed with me throughout this process.
I'll make sure I help everyone then. So yes, hi, thanks for the lovely introduction, Maria, that's super. I think what struck me, I've been involved in Aurora since I first came across it, obviously in 2013. I finally got the University of the Highlands and Islands to start engaging with the programme in 2018, and I'm also picked up the baton at GCU, so it's just great to have continued across two institutions. I think as a champion, for me, one of the important things I've tried to do is evaluate the impact of Aurora, and it was so interesting to hear the speakers this morning talking about that sense of empowerment. For me, we talked at the University of the Highlands and Islands about being emboldened, being confident. These themes come through, so certainly, and how we can continue that. And I also think about moving on from fixing the women and what we as a hugely powerful community can do across the sector to make some recommendations and changes. So looking forward to having more discussions.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So I would like to just create some framing, set the scene for our breakout groups. I will name the two broad topics. I hope we can also post them or make them visible or somehow share them if that's needed as well beyond that. But I would like you all to go back in your head to the background picture that Lillian had. And I hope you all noticed it. So there was this wonderful expansive river with so much greenery around it, and there was so much space and expansion and power somehow in that expansion. So why am I saying this? So I thought that today is a very special day, not just because we're here and celebrating, but also because we can look back at the past 10 years and make sense of it and bring it into something new, into a new light. But equally, we can look into the next 10 years, can't we? And imagine how that would be. And I thought that river is perfect. You know, we're at this point where there is current behind us and current in front of us, taking us into this future. So perhaps that may just help channel some sort of big creative thoughts today. And we have two topics for you. One, impact on higher education. So we want to explore with the panel how universities may need to adapt their approaches, their systems, their mechanisms to support women in leadership positions in universities, given the changing landscape. We are, just like in that river, we're in the middle of a very fast current. Things are changing, you know, as we speak. I'm sure something has changed since this morning. You know, this is a very, very dynamic environment. What do we think our universities need to do for us, for other women who will come on this program, for women who you will mentor? What actions can be taken individually and collectively to address these challenges? So that's topic one, impact on higher education. Topic two, Aurora's continuing relevance. That's lovely, thank you. We have it on screen now. So we want to explore with the panel how Aurora as a community, you know, how we as an alumni, I'll very cheekily include you into the we, and Aurora champions, how can we drive this forward? You know, why is Aurora still so popular? What does this mean? And what responsibilities do we have? Does every one of us have? As an alumni, as a champion, to drive this force, you know, to keep this river going in the direction that we want it to go. So these are the questions, and we have about 10 minutes to come up with some answers. Please use the Slido, put your questions in, upvote other people's questions. And yes, so there is a very helpful reminder from Shanice. So we will have a break after 15 minutes. So you can step away, we can continue working on the questions, talking to others, and we will then reconnect and grill the panel. Okay, and I'm assuming there'll be a... All right. And I'm assuming we are back. Okay. Just as we, just to protect our time, I think we will start. Thank you very much for your questions. We've been at the panel, and I were pretty much glued to the screen reading through your questions, and there are some really good questions there. Just to mention, I suppose, we appreciate we haven't given you very much time for group discussions, and it has been quite brief, even though you managed to come up with amazing questions and comments. There will be more opportunity for breakout room discussions during Jenny's session and after that as well. So this is not the last time you've spoken in groups. So hopefully you will be able to develop those conversations further. And also just, again, to reassure you all, there are more questions, of course, that we can pick up in the next half an hour. But those questions will be picked up by Fiona, by Steve, by the Advanced HE team, and they will be addressed one way or another, possibly through a written response or perhaps in some other ways. So we will pick up some questions that are quite broad so that it's more relevant to the vast majority of the group. We notice there are some quite sort of local or individual questions. And for example, about regrading or career progression, that can be picked up actually in the career session later this afternoon. So just so that if you've put a question there and it's not come up, there'll be opportunities to develop it further, and also it will be answered through other means by Advanced HE. Okay. The panel is looking very fresh and ready. This is very nice. So I will just open up with a very broad question to all the panel to set the scene. Anne, Mary, Katie, tell us what you see as emerging trends in higher education at the moment. What are the key opportunities and key challenges at the moment that will impact particularly women's leadership, do you think, in higher education in the next 5 or 10 years?
Shall I go first?
Sure.
For me, I think I'm going back to the report, Arnold's report. It's about one of the biggest challenges we've got is actually changing what leadership looks like. I still think that we have an idea of what leadership is in terms of Aurora, and it's about identifying your own way of leading. But I think when we come to recruitment and when we come to look at what leadership looks like and how it's enacted, it's not necessarily, there's a gap. So I think it's things like workload. I think some of these very senior roles in HE are becoming almost unattractive to women because they cannot balance, or unattractive to underrepresented groups in general who have other issues, who have other wishes to balance their working life balance. So for me, it's about unpicking and really challenging what leadership looks like. Why do we not see as many job shares? Why do we not see flexible ways of working? Leadership looks like way more than 9 to 5, way more than 5 days, and constantly firefighting. And that, to me, I think I see that trend continuing. So for me, that's one of the biggest challenges.
Thank you. Thank you. Anybody would like to go next?
I'll chip in here. Yeah, I think one of the biggest challenges, I mean, I totally agree with that, what Anne has said there, is it's just transforming what we understand leadership to be and about, and what the institution is going to look like as a result of that. And I think that's something that's, in my experience, is like frustrating that there has been so little progress perhaps in the last 10 years. And I also think at the other end of things, how can we increase the diversity of people who are coming in to HE as well? So I think there is a lot of barriers for diversifying that actually go right back to the recruitment. And so if you don't get people that are supported to understand, because we talk in a jargon, we often have a shorthand for all sorts of things that we come to that is quite exclusionary in lots of ways. If there isn't proper, like almost like workshops that we run, not for people, this isn't even just about women, for people to be able to get a grip about what it is that we're doing when we try to recruit new academics. And I suppose I've had recent experience of being on an interview panel, and I'm kind of like, it's part of me that really frustrates the way that so much of what we can expect of people is something that they kind of already need to know about before they've, so I think that side of things, and having a very different approach to what we mean by leadership. I was really struck by the idea of servant leadership. Like you're serving people. You're not just going, we're going this way, which tends to be, yeah. Anyway, I've probably said enough there.
I notice a couple of things just to add, and my experience is in the HE sector, but also in different sectors as well. And so I see lots of parallels here with what I see in other spaces as well, and thought I would share some of that. So what I notice around workload and burnout is increasingly with the data, the majority of us are experiencing some kind of burnout over the last 12 months or post-pandemic, and that's all genders, but specifically increasing for women, and particularly increasing for those of us who are also parents. So I think, to your point, Anne, and also Mary, that whole piece around flexibility and understanding what, as humans, we are carrying when we are also part of work, I think is a really critical piece. And what I notice in the HE sector, if I can be a little bit challenging here, and it's parallels in other sectors too, is I notice that systems tend to put that onto us as leaders to solve. So please, could you get better at resilience? Please, could you get better at managing your own well-being? Please, could you help your teams to be more resilient? And that's all great, but I think it also sits in the women need to be fixed bucket of things. And I think what we're saying here is actually we don't need to be fixed. We're not broken. We don't need to be fixed. What we need to look at is the systems which create the conditions whereby so many of us are experiencing burnout. And that's a bit of a reframe, I think, around what are we doing when we're doing leadership development. I think often, if we want to take that intersectional approach that we talked about earlier, if we want to have people with different lived experiences in our leadership positions, we can tend to say, oh, let's focus the leadership development on those people because they obviously need help to access this. And again, I would just encourage us to flip that in this conversation today, and to think more about how do we, as women and people of all genders together, actually disrupt those systems and think about what we can recreate and reimagine as ways of working together and being together as humans. So yeah, that's perhaps a bit of an external viewpoint, but that's some of the trends that I'm noticing in the sector, and perhaps a couple of the kind of rocks that I want to throw into the water and see how the ripples flow.
So can I just leap in again? I totally agree with what Katie said. And I think it just goes back to what I was sort of trying to point towards with this kind of like, as a leader, you're serving the people to achieve what needs to be done, rather than so that you're tapping into that as rather than feeling as if you're somehow forcing a system that already exists in a particular direction.
Absolutely. Thank you all three of you for this really good input and great insight. And Katie, to have your perspective, sort of cross-sector perspective, is so valuable here as well. Yes, and I definitely share the sentiment, people versus systems. And systems are such a massive part of organizational culture, which often gets forgotten. They're seen as separate, but they're not. It actually leads us very nicely to one of the very popular questions here is, do you have any advice for setting up a local Aurora alumni group at your institution and maintaining momentum around the discussion of women's leadership? And perhaps we can speak more broadly to the topic of keeping momentum going. We will have this injection of energy today, so how can we maintain it, sustain it, grow it? Would anybody like to pick this up? Perhaps some specific examples, or just a vision, or some very practical advice?
Oh, should I start again? I don't want to be the first to start again, but I'll chip in and then. So I think it's particularly challenging because I think we find that my experience in two institutions and what I've heard from other institutions is that the funding for Aurora is often about the places. So the institution funds the places, but it often thinks that the coordination and the running and the administration of Aurora in your institution just happens with the magic fairy as usual. And actually it's a really big piece of work and it takes a lot of momentum and energy to build your community. But I think specifically when I think about the University of the Highlands and Islands, it was a geographically distributed university. It was one of the most important pieces of feedback in the research study was that women felt connected across these small institutions, across these geographical areas. So I think, and what we did was we created opportunities for each cohort to come together. and we had very small cohorts, and it's the same with Glasgow Caledonia University. We have cohorts of about 10, and we have a CPT program that wraps around the Aurora program, and we have optional reflection sessions. But those are designed, from my point of view, they're designed to create a sense of belonging with your cohort. And then we try and join the cohort. So we're having a little alumni celebration at the end of, before Christmas, for our 150 Aurorans at the Glasgow Caledonia University, just coming together to celebrate a mini version of this. So I think it's acknowledging that it takes a lot of energy and momentum to keep that community going. But I think opportunities to support your participants as a champion, to support your participants to keep that network going, to have those connections, and to build those, and to draw on those relationships and feed those relationships, because it's those networks that can often help you then go for promotion. It can help you navigate your way around leadership, and they can be shouting. Somebody sent me a quote that said, I was presenting and I could hear all my Aurora champions shouting behind me saying, come on, you can do it. So I think it's about, it needs fed though, it needs nurtured. So I think any opportunity you can do to nurture it, to me, is important.
Yeah, I think, yeah, oh, sorry, Katie, did you want to go in there? But yes, clearly having champions within the organisation that are going to continue the momentum. We've unfortunately lost a lot of the women who were within the institution who were supporting Aurora. And so without that, it becomes very difficult to continue the sort of network and ongoing conversations. But just looking at some of the comments that I saw in the chat earlier, I think if you're able to continue the momentum for your action learning sets, I certainly think that was a great opportunity to sort of meet in a different circumstances and collectively with a clear focus, support others to deal with some of the things that they were finding most challenging. So I think finding a way to maintain those connections through the action learning sets that you've set up, or perhaps connecting with others beyond your own set, might be one way of keeping things moving.
I'm so passionate about this, and I'm so happy to hear that so many of the women here on this conference are continuing that momentum of staying connected. And to your points, Anna Mary, I think it's really key, isn't it, with our own development and our own sense of agency, that we have other women around us supporting us and cheerleading us and holding us to account as well, and bringing that kind of fierce challenge as well into those relationships. So I love this question. I'm so excited that you're considering how do we keep the momentum going. I think it's really critical. A couple of things I'd share that may be helpful. I think there's a difference between creating what I might call a safe space, so places where you as Aurorans can gather and receive that kind of input, fill up your cup, support each other, cheerlead, all that really good energy boosting and agency boosting stuff. And I contrast that with alongside something around a brave space. So a brave space is where, how do we also challenge the system? So linking it back to what we were just saying earlier with the systemic issues that we might also want to speak to. So in our brave spaces, we can share what are our lived experiences? What are we actually, these examples we've had in the chat earlier of the comments we've received or the microaggressions we've experienced. And for women of colour, we know that they're experiencing microaggressions in the workplace day in, day out. For me as a white woman, I don't have to experience that as part of my white privilege. But how do I, in a safe space, hold room for others to share their lived experiences? As a straight woman, I don't experience what my LGBTQ plus colleagues are experiencing in the workplace. So how do I hold a safe space for that? And then a brave space is where there are issues we then want to feed back to the system. So who perhaps we have a sponsor, perhaps we have a more senior, perhaps a male ally, perhaps a female ally in the organization, perhaps at a more senior level. Where can we kind of feed back? So there is a loop back to the institution, and you can frame that as, you've invested in us, you've sustained us through the Aurora program, and now we want to share a little bit of data with you that we think will support the institution's aims and ambitions around gender equity, for example. So you can kind of find ways to give that a tick for your senior stakeholders as well. But I wonder if that's helpful, that thinking about a safe and brave space. I think you need both if you want to be doing the individual development, the collective development, and also the systemic changes that I know you're all passionate about.
Thank you for your answers, and it actually taps into some other questions further down in the Slido. How do we embed Aurora beyond personal away days, etc.? Just to add, I think sometimes enthusiasm dwindles, doesn't it, as we go back to the grind? But just to remember as a moment how many people want to keep this going, because at some point I think the feeling may set in that you're the only one who's interested and everyone's forgotten about it. So I would just encourage everyone to capture this right now, that a lot of people want to keep this going and may feel that actually nobody else will. So just to drive you further. Okay, and I will pick up the next question, which actually perhaps we can start with Katie, and it's about male allies. I'm just gonna find it again. I loved that question actually, and I'm a big believer myself in having it, not making it just exclusively women's space, you know. How do we ensure that Aurora drives systemic change that brings male colleagues with us as allies rather than siloing women? And we spoke to this already a little bit, and Tracy mentioned some very good male bosses and male sponsors, etc. So perhaps you could expand on what's already been said. And Katie, would you like to start on this?
Sure. And I wanted to share too something, Mary, that you touched on, that so often this work, and when you were talking about the Aurora Champions, so often that work is side of desk, isn't it, for us? It's not the main thing we're doing. It's not the main thing we're being hired to do. So I want to really also acknowledge like the energy that it takes to sustain momentum in this kind of work. So I want to acknowledge that. And I wonder if that can be part of what you feed back to your institutions when you have those brave spaces, when you have an opportunity to share, this is what we've learned as Aurorans on this program, or this is what we want to bring back to our institution. These are all the skills and qualities that we now are adding value into our day-to-day work. And also, can we acknowledge that we want to do this other piece, which is about continuing the momentum, and how can you support me to find capacity or space for that? Because it is about resourcing, isn't it? Bottom line, it's not just about doing more, because we're also trying to reduce overwhelm and burnout here. So these things are all connected. And I think this links so well to that male allies question, because who are we talking to about the progress that you're making as Aurorans? Who are you engaging with that? And the senior teams that I know are really passionate about their people thriving. So you can find ways to speak to like what will motivate them. So they will want to see return on investment, of course. They'll want to see the value that you're bringing back to the organization, but they'll also want to see the energy and engagement and morale and fun, like all those other benefits that I know this program brings for you. So please be sharing those stories and narratives with your senior colleagues. If you can get some advocates on your senior team, on your board, if you can get your manager, your line manager, all of those senior people involved in that. Of course, that's also about inviting men to be engaged in the conversation. And this is about storytelling, isn't it? I think, and narrative, and what are we all trying to do here? It's not about just we as women and, like, as you say, siloing that narrative, but how do we make that a bigger conversation and link it to your institution's ambitions? Perhaps you can use the ESG targets. Perhaps you can use, there are particular, I don't know what there will be in your particular institution, but we can get quite tactical around how we tell stories that link to what other people will care about. I hope that helps in terms of that influencing piece. Really practically, I think there's something, I love the idea of your action learning sets, and maybe you have trios or you have ongoing a buddy system. Maybe you can invite a male colleague to come and sit in and be part of those conversations. And I would love to invite them to be listening in, not to be speaking, initially at least, in those, but perhaps it's a chance for them to listen into a group of women and what the group of women want to share. And, you know, you will all have male colleagues that you have relationships of trust and great rapport with. And perhaps that's where to start. You know, Fred, you know, Dave, whoever it is, come and join us. I'd love you to listen in to what's being shared. And that might be a way of just bringing more men into the conversation. And there are many, many men I know who are really passionate, of course, about this and who want to find ways to help. So this is also about showing really practical things that they can do too.
Mary and Anne, do you have anything to add to this?
No, I think it's a great suggestion, inviting men. I mean, I think I would also, people that you admire, I think just reach out to them, male or female, that you think are a good role model, that you think are going to be, going to be supportive of having a conversation. I think that's often a way to get a kind of completely different perspective, maybe from a different, totally different college or faculty that you're in. And I've certainly found that kind of helpful to go outside of your disciplinary area, and maybe a male colleague that you've met at an event or something like that you think would give you some insight. Certainly, yeah. No, I've often felt, well, equally I felt just like, that's a strong word, discouraged by men, but equally I've got probably many more male colleagues that have been very, very supportive. So in fact, the sort of bigger leadership roles that I've gone to in the past, I wouldn't have even thought about for myself, but it was a male colleague who said, I think you should apply for this. So I think, yeah, you never know when they're going to emerge as people that are going to be cheerleading for you. Don't be afraid to reach out to people and say, hey, I'd really, can you be my mentor? And then determine the terms of engagement for making that happen.
Yeah, I think yeah, I completely agree with that too. I think there is something, and there's also a question about that I picked, that I was just looking from Alison, about meaningful change to the system that allows different ways of leading. I do think that when we've reflected in all the 3-year evaluation project that we did at UHI, we all were quite perplexed when the common theme was that Aurora is an emotional experience, and actually it's a professional development learning program, but somehow it has this emotional connection, and I think it's a huge strength. But it does mean that when we're measuring what can often be intangible benefits, it's actually really difficult to translate those invisible, intangible impacts into the kind of top table, here's the metrics. So and it was really good to hear this morning from Alison about the metrics and the evidence, but I do think we have a challenge to get Aurora. I certainly think I've got a challenge to get Aurora at the top table, to talk about it, to get people to understand that it's not still like Athena Swan. It's to one side of, it's over there. It's not centre stage, and I think we've still got a bit of work to put Aurora centre, the lessons from Aurora, and the momentum and the kind of the momentum over time, the fact that it's 10 years and it definitely feels it's got another 10 years. It doesn't feel like it's waning anytime soon. So what lessons do we draw from that? It shouldn't be at the side. So I think we're talking about still getting it to the top table and finding ways of telling those stories that really hit home. This is why this is important, because I still think there's a sense that what's positive is not necessarily landing. I used to talk about being in a bit of a bell jar when I used to shout about Aurora. It wasn't being heard. So I think we've still got some work there to do.
Yeah, thank you very much. And thanks, Anne. I just wondered whether it sort of taps into the question that has been asked several times in different ways. How do we continue Aurora? How do we expand Aurora while budgets are tight? And I wondered whether briefly you have anything else to add to that as well. So yes, absolutely, top table, exposure, visibility, those sort of core messages. Is there anything else how we can really signpost the importance of Aurora? While it will be competing with Athena Swan, it will be competing with other things, although it shouldn't. They should all be integrating. But budget-wise, I'm sure they'll be seen as separate lines on a big spreadsheet. So how can we make sure that this is preserved and grown while organizations are possibly getting more anxious and much more sort of keeping a closer eye on the budget?
Individuals championing it, wear your badge. where you use your signature and reach out beyond women for I think we can share the lessons that we've learned. And there's been quite a few comments about, it's not just about women, it's about underrepresented groups in leadership. I know this is a bit, there's lessons that we can share with those underrepresented groups. So I think that's something that we could definitely do, but I think we need to stick together and shout about it and rely on each other and support each other and undertake mentoring, look for mentors. It's as I think Alison said at the beginning, leadership doesn't ever finish.
Mary and Katie, do you have anything else to add to this before we go on to the next question?
I don't have anything specifically around the budget piece. Again, a challenge I would offer that I notice a lot of white, cis, straight, able-bodied, neurotypical women learning how to navigate a hierarchical system and succeeding and progressing inside organizations. And then when they get there, wherever there is, they disrupt precisely nothing. They don't do anything necessarily beyond kind of surviving. And I understand the challenges of surviving at that level as well. That's perhaps a conversation for another day. But this point about how do we keep promoting and how do we keep championing, if you are in a position of privilege where you have access and where you have a space around the table, and that will be different for each of you in different institutions at different levels, then how are you using your voice to make space for others? And Aurora, of course, is part of that. I know that's challenging, but there's something there about who are you mentoring? Who are you giving advice to? Who are you opening up those opportunities to? Who are you passing the mic to? Who are you inviting onto panels? All of that. And if they look and sound like you, and if they have a similar background and lived experience to you, then great. And that's my challenge, is to think more widely. So, I'm answering a slightly broader question here, but there's something about how do we keep championing whatever level and kind of stage and level of career we've reached ourselves. How do we keep on championing and taking that broader approach?
Perfectly put.
Thank you. To grab onto the phrase, Katie, you just said surviving at that level. I think there is a lot there, and it taps perfectly into the question that several people upvoted, is about creative job design. How can we be creative or well? And when we say creative, I suppose we mean innovative, pressingly innovative, possibly, to create leadership roles that are actually sustainable for women and men. We already mentioned that women somehow end up doing more, the good active women in particular, at home and at work. So that's one challenge. But actually, more broadly, how can we design sustainable workloads and sustainable leadership roles that are attractive to good candidates? Any thoughts on that? I know it's not an easy question. Perhaps OD is a good place to start unpacking that.
This is definitely a sort of bugbear for me, because I think it's not just it's the design, but also it's what's rewarded, what is enacted and what's rewarded. And I think there's two, no matter what we say about what we want to do, it's what's rewarded and what gets noticed. I applied for a job at one point, which was a job share job, I think, and only one of us, and I did get appointed, but it felt, every time I think back about how I do the role I do, I think, do you know what? I think when I've shared roles and shared leadership positions, and I've done this 3 times, I've actually think it's so much more. I'm pushed, I'm challenged. It's both a safe and a brave space working, as a job share. It's phenomenally inspiring to work with somebody really closely, to bounce ideas off. And I think that isn't what leadership looks like at the moment. I think it's what leadership looks like. So I think I think we could, as Aurora, we could start to, we could have a challenging of what does leadership look like? Have you thought about leadership looking like this? And there's enough momentum here, even, for 300 people to say this is what we know it looks like. I think, not having leadership, being able to move, being able to say within times in your life and your work life where we have to step back, allowing that to step back and not thinking that's finished. Quite often if people step back, both there was comments about having children and there's comments about taking caring responsibilities where you have to step back. You are not there fully present and you should be able to step back and come back. We don't do that. People, you know, and and that's me again speaking as, you know, white and privileged, and I've experienced. So it's about how can we really change what leadership looks like. Boris Johnson, if that's what leadership looks like, come on, you know, excuse me. But there's definitely has to be changing that dialogue, changing what that looks like. So for me, if we could do that and maybe share examples of what good leadership looks like and where that's been rewarded, and take that back to our institutions and say, stop recruiting a sort of slightly vanilla version of a single male leadership position, and we might start to get somewhere. Sorry, that's personal. That's not in my label as Glasgow University or XU. That's my personal opinion.
And Mary, I mean, just from a bit of research that I did in my previous role, I think in academia, in academic roles, this probably is more common. Not job share necessarily, but part-time option, isn't it? So I just wondered whether you had any good examples to share from your experience at all.
Yeah, I still think it's very challenging for people in academia to do job shares. And I think some of that's to do with HR and the way that they operate as well. So you've got to work in tandem with recruiting processes. But because it still remains a kind of, don't know, you know, if you want to get for a promotion, it's quite, you know, it's quite a competitive field. But I was just so I don't really have a very good answer for that from an academic perspective. But when Anne was talking, I was thinking, like, you know, we have, in some ways, it needs to move away from this kind of hierarchical sort of, which is a very white, you know, kind of old-fashioned model of what HE structures exist of. You know, you've got your VC and you've got all these sort of layers down there, and I don't know if we can get to that point that we're aspiring towards without sort of to somehow decentralizing some of that allows more people to take up. So maybe it needs a real, you know, rethink of the whole kind of way the systems currently are structured to operate, to really get people given the opportunity to explore their leadership capacity and their skills, and to push forward particular projects. And, you know, that and obviously because because it only occurred to me just as this is not thought through completely, but it just seems to me we kind of need to get away from that structure, because that's what keeps reinforcing the same sorts of trends that I see, you know. So at my institution at the moment, who are in senior, you know, cisgendered white men, you know, and all the senior women, they've actually just taken out all the senior women. They've just got rid of them, pretty much. And so it's hard to see how we're going to break new ground without just thinking, actually, no, we have to think of completely different structure for this thing that doesn't use a 19th century model of what an HE institution is. And yeah, because if we're doing that in terms of what we do for students and the rest of it, why aren't we also thinking about that, about how it serves us as people within the institution?
Thank you, Katie. If you don't mind, I'll move us on to the last question, because we've only got 5 minutes. But just to say, actually, just what occurred to me, and I was in an OD role just recently, is you know, organizational systems, organizational structures. I mean, obviously nobody restructures the whole organizations, but departments and faculties restructure all the time. We obviously look at what needs to work, you know, we're all invited to feedback, but I wonder how many of us feeling that it's our place to feedback around job design, because I suppose it's HR specialism, isn't it? Most people wouldn't feel particularly comfortable doing that. But to address this audience, perhaps this is something you may wish to consider when your faculty or your department is being restructured, in view of this conversation and in view of the question many of you posed and upvoted, how can we be more creative about job design and workload allocation, is to actually insist on looking at it deeper while there are restructures going on. These are real opportunities, aren't there, to at least attempt it. Okay. We have last closing question, and it's like I said, we've got some really good questions still unanswered, but they're sort of merging into themes, and they're really relevant, I think, to almost looks like a toolkit or some sort of guidance that could actually emerge in the response to these questions. So our last question is for the whole panel is coaching style question, I would say, so to help us focus again on very, very specific steps that we can take. So what is the most impactful action, just one, that you think our audience could take in November? It is now the 2nd of November, to enable the development of our future Aurorans. All right. One specific step to enable future development that our audience members could take.
I'd suggest make a connection with somebody here that you've not met. Reach out to someone and make a connection with one person you've not really, that you've maybe met today or you've heard about, that you would like to make contact with, because I think the network is the glue that holds us together.
That's top of my list as well. Reach out to others, offer your support, space to chat, space to vent, but also, or go out for a meal together. You know, or even if money's an issue, just meeting together for a coffee or something like that can be just a really nice way to enhance relationships between people and reach out to meet with other people. That'd be my one.
Yeah, both of those, and I would add, find, as I said before, who doesn't look and sound like you and has a different background to you, and find those people who you can mentor and support. And then just on the systemic piece and the narratives and the engaging senior people, is there someone who you can find in your hierarchy that you can tell the story of Aurora, tell your story, and perhaps tell this broader story, and just start to plant these seeds with those more senior stakeholders as well.
Thank you. Wonderful answers and fantastic timekeeping, everybody. Thank you very much again for the questions. Thank you for the answers. And I believe we now have a quick break. Fiona will speak in a minute before we break for a break, and then we have Jenny Garrett speaking. Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Anne. Thank you, Katie. Thank you, everyone.
So let me just ask everyone to unmute and give our panel a round of applause. I think it was such an interesting session. So let's. Thank you so much. That was really, really wonderful. And I just took away from that so much, but particularly I think around those different spaces that we talked about, the brave spaces, as well as the safe spaces. And I was thinking how important it is for us to be able to move between both of them. And maybe to Mary's point about meeting up, we also have green spaces. So, you know, go for a walk together and get outside. Maybe not today if it's pouring with rain, but get outside and enjoy that nature as well. And the one other thing that I really resonated with me was when Anne said that piece about hearing the Aurora champions behind me saying you can do it. And I just thought how much that spoke to what Alison had been saying this morning about that confidence and how we can all buoy each other up. And as we get more senior in the organization, it's not only our duty, but it's probably our joy as well to be bringing those other female leaders up behind us. It's certainly been my joy for a long time to do that, and I think that's something that worth remembering as well. So what we're going to do now is to take a very short break. I wanted to say thank you all for those amazing questions. And yes, we are going to do things with them. We're going to try and answer as many of them as we can over the course of the day. And also afterwards as well. We're really interested to know what's been on your mind. So we'll do some more thinking about that and how we can share and distribute some questions as well as some answers. And I can see people are asking about accessing the Slido. So maybe that's still something that's possible. I'm not sure. We'll see. And here we are. We've got a link for it. Brilliant. So thank you again to the panel. We've just got a short break now, so feel free to switch your screens off, take a stretch, go and do whatever you need to be comfortable before we come back for our amazing keynote with Jenny Garrett. And we'll be back at 12:15 on the dot.